It's funny how you don't think much about running out of gas until it happens to you. I've always been the type to push my car a little too far, gambling that I'd make it to the next gas station before the needle hit empty. Usually I win, but that night I lost. Big time. It had been a long day. I was driving back from a work trip, eager to get home and sleep in my own bed. The route I was taking was mostly back roads, nothing but fields, forests, and a small town here and there along the road. It was peaceful in a way, the kind of drive where you could get lost in your thoughts and just enjoy the quiet. But the further I went, the more I realized I hadn't seen a gas station in quite a while. I looked down at the dashboard and saw the fuel gauge dangerously close to empty. The low fuel light blinked on, taunting me. There hadn't been a sign for miles, and it wasn't like I had great cell service to check for the nearest station. Not good, I said aloud. I slowed down, trying to conserve fuel, but it wasn't long before the inevitable happened. The car sputtered, coughed, and finally died, coasting to a stop on the side of the road. I let out a frustrated sigh, resting my forehead on the steering wheel for a moment. "Why didn't you stop earlier, you idiot?" I said to myself, knowing full well I should have filled up the last time I passed through a small town. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. I leaned back in my seat, pulling out my phone to check for a signal. Of course, there was none. Typical. I wasn't about to sit in the car all night, waiting for someone to drive by. The odds of that happening seemed slim. I remembered passing a gas station a few miles back. At least I thought it was a few miles. It was dark, and everything looked the same out here. With no other options, I decided to walk. I grabbed my jacket from the back seat, threw it on, and stepped out of the car. The night air was cold, biting at my skin, and the silence was unnerving. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that made you feel exposed, vulnerable. I locked the car and started walking, my boots crunching on the gravel at the side of the road. The only light I had was from my flashlight, barely illuminating the dark around me. The woods flanked both sides of the road, making me feel like I was being watched. I shook off the thought. It was just nerves. There was no one out here but me. At least, that's what I thought. I hadn't been walking for more than 10 minutes when I heard footsteps behind me. Like someone trying to match my pace, I stopped, turning around quickly, shining my flashlight back down the road. Nothing. Just the dark stretch of highway and the shadows of trees. I told myself I was just being paranoid and kept walking, but the footsteps started again. I stopped again, whipping around. That's when I saw him. He was standing just at the edge of the trees, barely visible. I almost missed him, blending in with the shadows as he was. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, his hair wild and unkempt, like he hadn't seen a shower in weeks. "Hey," he called out with a rough voice. "You heading to the gas station?" I was still processing the fact that this guy had appeared out of nowhere. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't seen him walking behind me. It was like he'd just materialized. "Yeah," I finally said, "ran out of gas." He grinned, but it wasn't a friendly grin. More like the kind of grin a predator gives its prey before it pounces. "Me too," he said, taking a step closer. "Mind if I join you?" Something about the way he said it set off alarm bells in my head. I didn't want him walking with me. Didn't want him anywhere near me. But I didn't know how to say no without making things awkward, or worse, escalating the situation. "Sure," I said. He fell into a step beside me, and we walked in silence for a few minutes. The longer we walked, the more uneasy I felt. He wasn't talking, just walking alongside me, his hands stuffed into his pockets. Every now and then he'd look over at me, and I'd feel his eyes lingering a little too long. So he said finally, breaking the silence, "What brings you out here? Work trip. Just trying to get home." It didn't seem like he was really listening. There was a weird feeling I got from him, something that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't put my finger on why, but I knew I needed to get away from him as soon as possible. We walked in silence for a while longer, the gas station still nowhere in sight. I looked down at my phone again, hoping for a signal, but still nothing. I was on my own. Then he spoke again, his voice low and casual like we were old friends. "You ever think about just disappearing?" I looked over at him. "What do you mean?" A strange grin creeping across his face. "You know, just leaving everything behind, starting fresh. No one knows where you are. No one comes looking for you." I kept quiet, my mind scrambling to make sense of it all. Why was he talking about this? Was he trying to mess with me, or was there something more to it? "You could do it, he continued, his voice calm. "Just walk off into the woods. No one would ever find you." I swallowed hard, quickening my pace. "I'm good. Thanks." He didn't say anything after that, but I could feel his eyes on me. I knew I needed to get away from him, but how? We were miles from anywhere, and he was right next to me. If he decided to do something, there was no one around to stop him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the faint glow of the gas station lights in the distance. I quickened my pace, eager to get there and get away from this guy. But as we got closer, I looked over at him, and he was gone. Just like that. 1 second he was there, and the next, he wasn't. I stopped, turning around, but there was no sign of him, no sound, no movement. I shook my head, telling myself I must have imagined it. Maybe he'd slipped into the woods, or maybe he was just messing with me. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I hurried to the gas station, filled up the can, and paid the clerk. I stepped back outside. I looked around, expecting the guy to be waiting for me, but the parking lot was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. As I made my way back to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, my nerves on edge. But when I reached my car, I froze. The hitchhiker was there, crouched next to my car, his hands on the door handle like he was trying to get inside. "Hey!" I shouted. He looked up at me, his face blank and expressionless. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stood up and started walking back down the road, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't wait to see where he went. I rushed to the car, filled up the tank, unlocked the door, and jumped inside, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and sped off down the road. I didn't ease up on the gas until I was long past the station. The hitchhiker was nowhere in sight, but my nerves were shot. Every dark shape along the road made me twitch with anxiety. In the end, it's not just running out of gas that puts you in danger. It's who you meet along the way. I've been on a lot of road trips, and I've run into my fair share of problems. Flat tires, engine trouble, and getting lost in the middle of nowhere. But running out of gas in the middle of a desolate highway at night, that one took the cake. I always swore I'd never be one of those people, the kind who ignores the gaslight until it's too late. But here I was, stranded with no gas station for miles and no phone signal to call for help. I was heading back from visiting a friend in a small town a few hours away. It was supposed to be an easy drive. I'd left late in the afternoon, thinking I'd get home by dark, but I underestimated how long it would take, and before I knew it, the sun was sinking fast behind the hills, and the road lay out in front of me, long and black, twisting into nothingness. The road was barren, save for the distant, sporadic glow of headlights from other cars. When the gaslight came on, I knew I was in trouble. I hadn't passed a gas station in miles, and the last one I remembered seeing was at least 30 minutes back. I tried to stay calm, hoping I'd make it to the next town, or at least find a rest stop, but the car had other plans. The engine sputtered, the car slowed, and I coasted to a stop on the side of the road. "Great," I muttered to myself, staring out into the dark. "Just great." I pulled out my phone, praying for even the smallest bar of signal, but it was useless. The screen showed 0 bars, and there wasn't even a hint of Wi-Fi anywhere nearby. I was truly in the middle of nowhere. I could walk, but who knew how far the next gas station was? Besides, I didn't have a gas can, so even if I did find a station, I wouldn't be able to bring anything back with me, and staying in the car felt equally risky. What if no one passed by? What if someone did? Just as I was starting to feel the weight of the situation settle in, I saw headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. I held my breath, wondering if the driver would stop or just keep going. My luck so far didn't inspire much hope, but to my surprise, the car began to slow as it neared mine. The vehicle, a dusty old pickup truck, pulled up beside me, and the driver rolled down his window. A middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap peered out at me. He sounded friendly, but there was something about the way his eyes gleamed in the headlights that made me uneasy. "Ran out of gas, huh?" he said with a chuckle, as if this was a common occurrence. Yeah, I admitted, forcing a smile. Wasn't paying attention, I guess. Happens to the best of us. Lucky for you. I was headed to the gas station just a few miles down the road. I can give you a ride if you want. No sense in walking out here. For a moment I hesitated. Something about the situation felt off. Maybe it was the way he kept smiling, like he knew something I didn't. Or maybe it was the isolation, the vast emptiness of the road that made me feel vulnerable. But what choice did I have? It wasn't like cars were lining up to help me out, and walking seemed even worse. I looked at my phone again, still no signal. I looked back at the man, weighing my options. All right, I said finally. That'd be great. He grinned wider, his teeth catching the light from his dashboard. Hop in. I grabbed my wallet and phone and locked the car behind me as I climbed into the passenger seat of his truck. The interior smelled faintly of cigarettes, and the seat covers were worn and stained. He didn't seem to notice my hesitation as he started the engine and pulled back onto the road. So, where are you headed? He asked, looking over at me. Home, I replied, keeping my answers short. Visiting a friend out of town. Nice, he said. Not much out here, though. You sure picked a quiet stretch to run out of gas. Yeah, I noticed, I said, trying to keep my tone light. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the truck rattling along the empty road. The further we went, the more my nerves started to flare up. The man wasn't exactly doing anything wrong. He hadn't said or done anything threatening. But there was something about his demeanor that I couldn't shake. He was just too calm, too comfortable with the situation. So, you said the gas station is up ahead? I asked. There was nothing but trees and darkness. No signs, no buildings. Yeah, he replied. Just a few more miles. But instead of continuing down the highway, he took a sudden turn onto a smaller road, one that twisted and snaked through a thick patch of woods. My stomach tightened. Where are we going? I asked, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. Oh, this way's quicker, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Trust me, we'll be there in no time. The further we drove, the worse it got. The road was barely visible now, like just a dirt path cutting through the trees, and the truck's headlights barely illuminated the way ahead. I felt the panic rising in my chest. Look, I really appreciate the help, I said, my voice firmer now, but I think I'll just head back to the main road. I'll wait for another car. He didn't respond at first, and he pressed his foot harder on the gas. Hey, I said, my heart racing now. I said I want to get out. Without a word, he reached over and locked the doors. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some helpful stranger. I'd gotten into the truck with someone who had no intention of taking me to a gas station. I looked around, desperately trying to think of a way to escape. The truck slowed as we approached a stop sign, the first one we'd seen in miles. I didn't know where we were, but I knew this was my chance, the only one I'd get. And lucky for me, the doors opened from the inside, even when locked. As soon as the truck came to a stop, I reached for the door handle and yanked it open. He shouted something, angry, but I didn't stop to listen. I jumped out of the truck, hitting the ground hard and rolling into the dirt. My legs were shaking as I scrambled to my feet and took off running down the road. Behind me, I heard the truck's tires screeching as he tried to turn around, but I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could. The trees whipped by in a blur, and the road felt like it would never end. But I kept going. I couldn't stop. Eventually, I spotted headlights in the distance. A car was coming down the road. I waved my arms frantically, and the driver slowed, rolling down the window. Please, I gasped out of breath. I need help. The driver, an older man with a worried expression, nodded and unlocked the door. I climbed into the passenger seat, still shaking. What happened? He asked as he started driving, looking in the rearview mirror. I ran out of gas, I said, trying to catch my breath. Some guy, he offered to help, but then he wouldn't let me out of the truck. The driver's face hardened. Where is he now? I looked out the back window, but there was no sign of the truck. I don't know. The driver took me to the nearest gas station, where I finally got a signal and called the police. They said they'd keep an eye out for the truck, but I never heard anything more about it. To this day, I still don't know who that man was or what he had planned, but I'm grateful that I managed to get out when I did, and I learned a valuable lesson. Never trust a stranger on a dark, empty road. We'd been driving for hours, heading back home after a week-long vacation trip in another state. The car was filled with that end-of-trip exhaustion, and we were ready to be home. But the miles stretched on endlessly. The sun had already set in the horizon, leaving nothing but a thin line of orange on the far-off hills. Darkness swallowed the road ahead, and the only company we had were the headlights of occasional cars passing by, going in the opposite direction. It was eerie how quiet everything felt once night settled in. I had planned to stop and refuel before it got too late, but somehow we'd lost track of time. The GPS told us the next gas station wasn't for another 30 miles, and the fuel gauge was already dangerously low. We were in the middle of nowhere, the kind of stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever without any sign of life, just empty fields and long stretches of trees. Diana, my girlfriend, sat in the passenger seat staring out the window. "We'll make it, right?" she asked. I could feel that she was a little concerned. "Yeah, we should be fine," I said, trying to sound confident even though I wasn't so sure. The needle on the gas gauge had dipped into the red. "We'll make it." But 10 minutes later, the car sputtered and slowed. The gas had run out. I pulled over to the side of the road, staring at the dashboard like I could somehow will the car to keep going. It was pitch black now, the kind of dark where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. "We're out of gas," I said, trying to keep calm. Diana sighed, pulling out her phone. "Let's call for help." I reached for mine, but there was no signal. Same here, no service. We sat there in the car for a while, contemplating our options. We could wait and hope someone would stop, or we could try walking. But the GPS said the next gas station was still 25 miles away, and walking along a highway at night didn't seem like a safe bet. Then I spotted something up ahead on the side of the road, a rest stop, old and weathered, the kind you barely notice during the day and avoid at night. It looked abandoned, but it was our best shot at finding a place to wait until morning, or at least see if we could get a signal. "Let's push it," I said. "We can get the car closer to the rest stop and stay the night in the car." Diana didn't look thrilled, but with no other choice, we got out and started pushing. The car was heavy, and the cold night air wasn't helping, but we managed to get it to the abandoned rest stop. The place looked even worse up close. The windows were cracked, the paint peeling off the walls, and the few lights that still worked flickered erratically. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. "This place gives me the creeps," Diana muttered, shivering as she pulled her jacket tighter around her. "It's just for the night," I reassured her, though I wasn't entirely convinced myself. We locked ourselves in the car, hoping to settle in for the night. It wasn't comfortable, but at least we were out of the cold. The car felt like a fragile cocoon against the vast emptiness outside. I kept telling myself we were safe inside, but there was something unsettling about the complete isolation. The rest stop stood in the distance, dark and foreboding, while we sat, huddled in the car with no idea what the night would bring. Hours passed, but neither of us could sleep. The car windows fogged up from our breath, obscuring our view of the outside. I wiped a small circle on the glass to peek out, but it didn't help much, just darkness, with the dim silhouette of the rest stop barely visible. And then, suddenly there was a noise. At first it was faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, too close for comfort. I shot Diana a look. "Do you hear that?" She nodded, her eyes wide. "Someone's out there." We both stayed completely still, listening as the footsteps circled the car. My heart started to race. I strained to see outside, but the windows were still fogged. The feeling of being blind to what was happening around us was suffocating. The footsteps paused near the back of the car, and then the handle on the back door jiggled. Someone was trying to get inside. Diana gasped, gripping my arm tightly. "What do we do?" "Lock the doors," I whispered, even though I already knew they were locked. My hands fumbled with the lock button, double-checking that everything was secure. The handle jiggled again, more forcefully this time, as if whoever was out there was testing each door, looking for a weak spot. I grabbed my phone, frantically trying to find a signal, but there was nothing. We were completely cut off. Then the car started to shake. Whoever was outside wasn't just trying to get in, they were trying to scare us. "There's more than one of them," Diana whispered. "I can hear them." I strained to listen, and sure enough, There were more footsteps now. At least two, maybe three. They were moving around the car, whispering to each other, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. "We need to get out of here," I said, but we both knew there was no way. The rest stop was abandoned, the road was deserted, and we had no way of calling for help. Just then, the car shook again, this time more violently. The whole vehicle lurched to one side as if someone had thrown their weight against it. "They're trying to tip the car," I realized, panic setting in. Diana's grip tightened on my arm, her nails digging into my skin. What do they want? I didn't have an answer. All I could do was sit there, helpless, as the car rocked back and forth, the sound of footsteps and low murmurs filling the air. The windows were still fogged up, making it impossible to see how many people were out there or what they were planning. And then, with a loud hiss, the car tilted again, this time accompanied by the unmistakable sound of air escaping from the tires. "They're flattening the tires," I said, my voice shaking. "We're trapped." Diana's eyes filled with terror, and I could feel my own fear rising to the surface. We were sitting ducks, completely at the mercy of whoever was out there. "Call 911, I said, my voice tight with urgency. "Try again." Diana fumbled with her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed. Finally, she managed to complete an emergency call. I could hear her whispering frantically into the phone, telling the dispatcher where we were, what was happening. The whole time, I kept my eyes on the windows, waiting for the next attack. The car continued to rock, and the tires were now completely deflated. After what felt like an eternity, Diana hung up the phone. "They're sending someone," she said, whispering, "but it's going to take a while." The footsteps circled the car again, then paused. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. It felt like they were waiting for something, waiting for us to make a move or for the cops to arrive. Minutes ticked by, each one slower than the last. And then, finally, the sound of sirens cut through the stillness. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, and I could see the shadows of our tormentors retreating, disappearing into the darkness. The police car pulled up, and an officer stepped out, shining his flashlight around. "Are you folks okay?" he asked, his voice calm but concerned. We explained what had happened, and he inspected the car, his flashlight sweeping over the windows and tires. "Take a look at this," he said, motioning for us to step outside. Reluctantly, we got out of the car, and that's when I saw it. Handprints. Dozens of them, smeared across the fogged-up windows, all over the car. Whoever had been out there had pressed their hands against the glass, watching us the entire time. "You were smart to stay in the car," the officer said, shaking his head. "I've seen this kind of thing before on these back roads. You were lucky. Lucky." The word felt hollow as I stared at the handprints. We didn't waste any more time. The tow truck arrived soon after, and we got out of there as fast as we could. But the memory of those unseen figures watching us, shaking the car, deflating the tires, has stayed with me ever since. And every time I drive through a remote area now, I make sure my gas tank is full, because the last thing I ever want is to be stranded again, alone in the dark. I hadn't planned on staying at the office that late. As a woman living a 45-minute drive from work, I never liked staying late, especially knowing I'd have to drive alone at night. But work has a way of piling up unexpectedly. It was supposed to be a simple drive home, just like any other. I didn't think much of it as I got in the car, ready to unwind. It wasn't until I was on a long, empty road, no one else in sight, far past the time I'd expected to be home, that I noticed the gas gauge needle teetering on the edge of E. That's when I realized my mistake. Why hadn't I checked the gas before I left? In front of me, the road stretched on endlessly, with dense woods hugging it from both sides. I knew there wasn't a gas station for miles ahead, and my chances of running out of fuel were going up by the minute. The darkness pressed in. My headlights were the only source of illumination as the radio crackled with static. I reached out to adjust the dial, desperate for some background noise, something to make the isolation less suffocating. But no matter how much I fiddled with it, the radio remained silent, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the quiet hum of the engine. And then, as if on cue, the car gave a violent shudder. I clenched the steering wheel, praying the car wouldn't stop. but it was no use. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then died altogether. The momentum carried me a few more yards before I came to a stop on the side of the road, the silence even more oppressive now that the engine was off. "Great," I muttered, leaning back in my seat. This wasn't how I envisioned my night ending, stranded in the middle of nowhere, no cell signal, no gas, and no one around to help. I fumbled for my phone, looking at the screen. No bars, of course. I sat there for a while, debating my next move. I could start walking, but the road was dark, and there I'd walk miles before finding a gas station. Besides, what if someone drove by while I was gone? I didn't want to leave my car vulnerable, so I waited, hanging on to the slightest bit of hope that another car would come by. It had to, right? This was still technically a main road, even if it didn't look like it. The minutes stretched on, just me and the distant chirping of crickets. I looked at the rearview mirror. Nothing. I squinted into the darkness ahead, still nothing. Just when I was about to give up and resign myself to a long, uncomfortable night, a flicker of light caught my eye. Headlights. My heart leaped with hope as a car came into view, its lights growing brighter as it approached. I could make out the outline of an older model sedan, its paint faded and chipping. I leaned forward, watching as it slowed, then came to a stop just a few feet behind my car. I was overwhelmed with relief. Finally, someone had stopped to help. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall. His footsteps were slow as he approached, and for a moment I felt a strange unease settle in my chest. But I pushed it aside. After all, I needed help. I rolled down my window just a crack, enough to hear him, but not enough to give him full access to my car. "Hey, thanks for stopping. I ran out of gas, and my phone's got no signal." The man stopped beside my window. His smile seemed friendly enough. "No problem," he said, his voice gravely. "I can give you a ride to the nearest gas station." I hesitated. The way he said it, there was something too eager in his tone, too insistent. "That's okay," I replied, still trying to keep things light. "I think I'll wait here and flag someone down. I don't want to leave my car." His smile faded, replaced by a look of irritation. "You won't get anyone else out here this late," he said. "Come on, I'll take you. It's not far." Again, that insistence. I forced myself to stay calm. "Really, I appreciate it, but I'd rather wait." The man's expression darkened. "It's not safe out here," his tone hardening. "You're better off coming with me." My gut instinct was practically screaming at me to keep the window up, to keep him out. I looked around, hoping for another car, a sign of anyone else, but there was nothing. Just me and this man. "I'll be fine," I said, a little more firmly this time. "Thanks for stopping, though." For a moment, he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me, his eyes cold and calculating. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. And then, without warning, he reached for the door handle. I reacted on instinct, hitting the lock button just as his hand made contact with the door. The sound of the locks clicking into place seemed to snap something in him, and he banged on the window hard enough to make the glass rattle. "Open the door," he demanded, his voice low and menacing now. "I'm trying to help you." I shook my head, inching away from the window, my hands trembling as I fumbled for my phone. Still no signal. "Go away," I shouted. But he didn't leave. Instead, he started circling the car, his fingers tapping on the windows as he moved, his breath fogging the glass. I could hear him muttering something under his breath, though I couldn't make out the words. I shrank down in my seat, praying that someone else would come by, that another car would show up, or that the man would get bored and leave. But he didn't. He kept circling, his fingers trailing over the windows. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to think. What could I do? I couldn't just sit here, but I also couldn't get out. I was trapped, and he knew it. That's what he wanted. He was enjoying this, seeing me scared, seeing me helpless. And then, as if the universe had heard my desperate plea, headlights appeared in the distance. They were faint at first, just a speck of light on the horizon, but they were getting closer. I turned in my seat, craning my neck to see. The man saw them too. He stopped circling the car. For a moment I thought he might try to stop the other car, wave them down, but instead he froze, his expression shifting from anger to something more cautious. The other car was getting closer now, its headlights flooding the road, and the man took a step back. Then another. and just like that, he turned and hurried back to his sedan, slamming the door shut. Within seconds, he was gone. Speeding down the road. The other car slowed as it approached, the driver rolling down the window to ask if I needed help. It was a family. I nodded, unable to speak, still shaken from the encounter. They shared their mobile data with me so I could get in touch with a tow truck. As I sat there waiting for the tow, I kept looking down the road, expecting to see that man's car reappear, but he was gone and I was safe. It's been years since that night, but I've never forgotten the look in that man's eyes, the way he circulated the car like I was his prey. I've never run out of gas since then. I make sure my tank is full before I go anywhere, and I keep my doors locked even in broad daylight. And that's all for today. If you like the story, make sure to subscribe for more horror stories that'll keep you up at night. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss out on the next terrifying tale. Share this video with your friends if they dare to watch. Stay safe out there, and remember, not everything is as it seems.